Women's Show. And today we want to put our lens on the 67th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. A lot has happened in 2 weeks that we need to, hone in on to understand what the digital age means for women and girls, especially in advocating for their participation and their engagement in, innovation and technological advancement. And today I have two amazing ladies.
Yay.
Yes, to help me have this conversation quite dear to me. There's a beautiful history of mentoring and mentorship that has happened in these spaces, and to have people you've mentored and people that have mentored you in the same space calls for a pause to say, wow, we are doing the work that we talk about and advocate for. And on the show today, I have Executive Director Akina Mama Wa Afrika, Eunice Musiime. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tricia. Lovely to be here. Hello to our viewers and listeners.
It's always a pleasure to have you around. I love to channel in and hone in on the knowledge that you have. And next to her is Miss Poni Patience Ayikoru, former Guild Speaker in UCU and the Chief Steward at FemTalk West Nile. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tricia. It's amazing to be on this show and to share a panel with Eunice and being hosted by yourself. Yes.
So, ladies, just to, hone in, a lot of people don't know, or if they know, they don't know the nitty-gritty that happens around CSW67 as it happens. But this year, when they had the theme around innovation and technology, I felt like we had a step forward into the digital futures and what it means for women and girls. But to start us off the conversation, and I'll give you the chance to begin, is on how do we create, first of all, because the theme is broad, but it speaks to the now that we've now started to experience on a daily basis. The future of work has changed as well. So how do we create ecosystems for women and girls to be able to, advance technology, participate on digital platforms, build, deploy their own technologies, so that, without anything, we are not just users of these platforms, but equally we are producers and, active members of these digital platforms and the technologies that we are creating.
Thank you, Tricia. This is an interesting topic to dig into, especially because I'm with a team that is more advanced in digital technologies than I am. So this is interesting. We're going to be able to have that intergenerational conversation. So I'm glad to be here. Actually, yesterday I was playing a game with my daughter regarding what she does better and what I do better. So the way the game goes, you say, I can cook better than you. And then she says, you win. So then, of course, she said, I am more advanced in technology than you are. And that's the truth of the matter. Why? Because she's always playing Roblox, which is part of this whole metaverse. She's able to use ChatGPT. I didn't use it. I'm just coming to terms with all these different technologies. And my daughter is only 7 years old. And so to be able to see, I'm going to be 46 this year. So I'm 46, she's 7, and she's more advanced in the use of these new technologies. That tells you about what the future spells for this world. So turning to the theme of the Commission on the Status of Women, maybe just to recap and say that the Commission on the Status of Women is a premier platform where I'll start with women rights activists, feminists, governments, UN agencies come together to review the status of women. So that's why it's the Commission on the Status of Women. To review the status of women, so our situation, our conditions, and then to be able to come up with concrete strategies going forward. It meets annually, and each year that they meet, there's a theme that they focus on. Sometimes the theme is being revisited. So the theme that we have this year is actually being revisited. And as reflecting on the time that we had the last theme, which was quite similar, and the times that we are in now, the world
A lot
has
has changed.
shifted
True.
totally. In fact, the conversations we had then almost 10 years ago and the conversations we are having now are totally different. So that time we're talking about access. The issue of access was an important issue. Access to technologies. But as you know right now, we are not even just talking about access. We're talking about ownership. Who owns?
Who owns the
For example,
systems?
when Elon Musk bought Twitter, then it shifted the dynamic of who owns Twitter. Is it still a free space? Well, it was never a free space. Can we still have the conversations we want to have on Twitter? Who is he bringing back to Twitter that had been removed from Twitter? So all those conversations are totally different from the landscape that we had then. And of course, while technology has been primed as an accelerator for gender equality, we as feminists know that it may not necessarily be the truth. And why may it not necessarily be the truth? Maybe it's actually going to expand the divides that we've seen. So technology, yes, is an accelerator for development, but to ask the question, development for who? Is it actually making more money for a certain group of people? And then we also know that what happens physically happens online. So if physically we have not dealt with some of the issues that we face as women, such as violence, it means that it has just been shifted to online. So there are all those questions that we need to ask. When you think about big tech and what it means for us, who owns big tech?
True.
Yeah, is it so? And how are we trying to close those gaps between those who have access and ownership? And when you think about the issue of who has resources, women don't have resources as simple as it is to buy data. So are they going to be online? So how are these technologies being developed in response to women's needs, to women's conditions, etc.? So there's a lot to unpack around this topic. When you think about education, there's a gap in education between boys and girls. So is technology going to close that gap or further expand it? So too many questions that I'm asking, but yes, but I also know that because I'm with you, young women, this is a topic that, this is a generation that you've grown up in. So actually you may not even relate. You may not even relate to some of the issues that create these gaps in education, in just really the issues that pertain to women, so politically, economically, and socially. Over to you.
And then I love the critical questions you ask, especially when it comes to the generational relationship, when it comes to experiencing these platforms.
Yes.
And earlier on, I was talking to patients, I was telling her it's very funny that the tables have turned. I was listening to some of the side events, and the critical ask in the room from older women was, if the recommendations that are coming from this event do include older women, then we will be willing to sign onto them. Because it almost feels like in the disparity of creating futures, we've now had a whole other, sector of women cut off. And so the conversation around how inclusive our digital spaces, even for older women, is critical, because they are still part of this conversation and it's still part of our ecosystem that we have to thrive, especially. But going forward, when we speak on education, I think that is where I want to bring you in, Patience. And Eunice asked critical questions of that disparity between girls and boys, the narrative of, there are more boys getting the education, but even in the experiences of digital worlds, a boy will play a game way before a girl will. And, they've been exposed to a lot of things, to Minecraft, to virtual realities, to the Internet of Things. And girls pick up later. But when you look at the education system of Uganda today, where we still have, a curricula that speaks to history is not our own, to reality is not our own, but then also that has not married significantly into the digital space, how can we then leverage it for young girls coming into this space? but then also for older ones that hope to, be in touch with the realities of a digital future happening before us.
Okay, thank you so much, Tricia. I was very interested in listening to Eunice's submission, and I just want to pick on from where she left as I respond to your question. On the aspect of education, she clearly elaborates that indeed there is that divide, the generational divide, and that is why such an amazing panel speaks to also the action that we're putting in place. The United Nations Human Rights Council clearly stipulates that women or human beings need to be able to have safety online in as much as they have safety offline. And Eunice clearly says that from the generations that have been there before us, we didn't hear about so much of the access to access to digital platforms. And now today we're talking about how to use them and be able to put them to advantage. And that speaks to how much work the women before us did at that time to ensure that all these rights are brought to table. And today the mantle has been shifted to us, the young women rights activists, and those that will possibly come after us, that there is a lot to be done in place. So the aspect of education, I must say that education is not a privilege, it is a human right. And it has to be able to capture things that are changing, that are dynamic in our day-to-day life. Now, Uganda, unlike other countries, is more theoretical, and we all acknowledge that. And in as much as they've tried to incorporate all these practical aspects into our education system, we still see a major divide in that we even see so many loopholes that come in between that make women or girls fail to access the full advantage of education because of certain challenges that are socially constructed within our communities. Girls in rural areas are not able to access education in its wholesomeness, to their advantage. And for me, I choose to say that ignorance, in as much as it's a human right to have education, ignorance is a very dangerous aspect, and it affects our personal and community in the end at large, and later leads to poverty. But then in light of the fourth industrial revolution, I believe Uganda should be able to incorporate actively how we access digital platforms if we want to reach the vision 2040, or to achieve parity where we have both men and women on a more equal ground as we try to access innovation and these digital platforms. Then we really have to incorporate that and sensitize as much as possible, and not look that and not underlook someone who is maybe not able to maneuver these platforms, like the women that were there before us, the people that feel this is something so foreign and we're not going to learn how to utilize these digital platforms. So and it comes with a lot of challenges which I'll possibly bring out later on, but I believe there's a lot that needs to be done with teaching ourselves. The young generation and the more experienced or older generation should be able to work together and analyze these digital platforms. It's unfortunate that these digital platforms are now being used, like you said, mostly by the men, and really they use it to overpower. There's a way community or society keeps putting women to constantly bargain for their safety, both physically and online. And now that we're moving into the online, before even addressing the many challenges we have, which are offline, then we still have a lot to go. There is possibly 100 more years ahead of us to work on these challenges. So I believe education plays a very key role. It's a human right, and women have the right as human beings to be very safe online as much as they should be safe offline, and there's no excuse to that.
And I hear you, and I love, because as you're speaking, I thought of the intersections of having safeguarding rules that cut across between our physical and online spaces, so that we do not have a distinction, because that is where we lose the conversation. The imagination that whatever is happening online certainly isn't part of our physical, but there have been people that have been bullied online only to be perpetuated offline. I mean, the LGBTQ community would testify to that the violence does proceed after that. But to continue this conversation on safeguarding and, having platform rules and norms, cyber norms that continue to safeguard women, as looking at the, I don't know, it's called Guterres, the UN Secretary General, and he was saying even in the creation of these virtual realities, the AI of today, and the creation of the metaverse, even in the Silicon Valley itself alone, a lot of men are at the heart of creation. And the challenge with that is it's going to perpetuate a gender imbalance because they create platforms that speak to the male perspective. And so in as much as we want to, include women into this conversation, women in STEM continue to be, very marginalized. And if anything, very little of their work is, put into the systems. And when that highlight came, I remember experiences from Sweden where they were talking about, sexual harassment that happens in virtual reality entities. I was like, okay, that sounds like a privileged place to be, because us from the South, we've barely tapped into, artificial intelligence and virtual realities. But in that point in time, it gave me a loop into what the future will look like. That even these digital spaces, virtual as they are non-existent in our imagination, but they still also have sexual harassment issues. So how do we deal with issues of safeguard beyond, because the conversation that we may be able to marry with is a physical and online, but now imagining even in the virtual realities, how do we deal with issues of safeguarding and creating safety around using these platforms, especially
Thank
for
you.
our children?
For everyone, really.
Yes.
But yeah, just to say that as you spoke, as reminded that sometimes we need to move beyond the binaries of men and women,
Yes.
and really just center this conversation in a conversation of power. Who has power and who doesn't have it? So who is powerful and who is not as powerful? Because when you think about the creators of all these technologies, it's those with resources.
Yes.
And who can access those resources to create. I'm reminded of a white woman who said that when she went to pitch, whenever she goes to pitch to different investors for her technology, she gets so many questions asked of her. Unlike when men meet over a cup of tea, and then they're like the boys club, and then they will invest. And that was a woman, a white woman. And so I got thinking about what are the possibilities for a young African woman, brilliant in STEM, and being able to attract investors to come up with an app. So the issue of power then determines who can create all these technologies. And then it also determines, because when you think about the women in STEM that have been able to create the African women, let's speak about the African women. Most times the apps they have created are responsive to the needs of African women and men or African children, because it's their lived reality. So if you're seated in Silicon Valley, of course, the app I'm going to create is going to be responsive to a certain community. So, and then again, that begs the question of who has resources and who doesn't have, who has power and who doesn't have. And as you spoke, I also thought about who has the power to determine, now you can be on Facebook, and now you can't.
That's so true.
Or who has the power to determine, like we recently saw in Nigeria, say we're having an election, I'm going to ensure that people have free data and they can access. So all that is a question of power that we must unpack. So even when you think about creating technologies that are safe, it's again, who is creating those technologies? If you are a woman with a lived reality of knowing that this space is likely to prey on young children, then you're going to put those safeguards. So who is creating those technologies also truly matters. And we have organizations in Uganda like We Too, Women in Technology Uganda, or there are many actually young women's outfits, or outfits that are designed to support women in STEM to flourish and thrive in this area. And those need to really be supported because they're going to create products that are responsive and are putting in place the safeguards that are required. If I am a man who in reality loves to prey on children, and I can create a product that creates those loopholes I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So what I do in the natural is what I'm also going to do in the virtual. So we need to also think about, and who is likely to have funds to create, because when you think about predators, the famous one, the Einsteins,
Yes.
those are men with money and resources. So I'm likely to support Patience, my friend, because friends hang out together to create products like that, that are going to fit within the needs that I'm trying to attract. So it's really to think deeply about those questions.
And I hear when you speak of power, the first thing that came to my mind is what you earlier said on big tech and, you know, and the narrative of to whose benefit are we creating these spaces and these digital platforms. And there was never a time a capitalist actually thought of the human best right approach in dealing with tech and digital platforms. But on that angle, when you think of that, it also creates our advocacy agency messages on how we advocate for better internet, but then also how we sustain our campaigns online. And it's on that end because I've seen you do some, you know, digital platform campaigns and, you know, advocate for period poverty and different initiatives. How do we, long after these campaigns have gone, how do we sustain online advocacy so that we continue to speak truth to power to the issues that women are facing without tiring? Because I feel like hashtags come and go, but how do we constantly, you know, create a reminder in the images of people, because now people really are living on their phones, that this is urgent. Like an issue like period poverty is urgent and it's happening and you need to look at it critically.
Thank you so much, Tricia. As Eunice was speaking about power, I got to think more about the challenges that we are facing today with these digital platforms. In as much as, yes, the persons that came up with all these, including women that were very instrumental in actually, the women in STEM that were instrumental in building these platforms, we still see a power divide, who gets to control what. But I just wanted to outline the fact that women are constantly put in a place of begging for safety, like I earlier on hinted. But these online platforms, I'm sure even the more experienced or older generation face the same. Women face a lot of challenges on these digital platforms.
And usually the ask is become resilient.
Exactly. They expect you to act in a certain way. You're not allowed to post what you want, to post your happiness. People are sort of offended. Society comes under your comment section and they're trying to trash you down. There is trauma-centered feminism today, especially in the era where young women prefer being associated as women rights activists as opposed to feminists, and yet it's the same agenda. Actually, it is the same. It's just the difference in the wording. So a woman will say, "No, me, I'm not feminist," but it's just because they possibly face some trauma-centered kind of approach or challenge online on the media. You're posting something, they're trashing you and saying, "Oh, what do you feminists have to say?" Or if there's something that doesn't even concern you, someone is tagging you.
Where are the feminists?
Where are the feminists in this? And then even the way people still keep referring to women over the years, I'm sure even Eunice can attest, have always lived in this kind of on a ladder that is so low. We're always placed and labeled at a very lower aspect of life, in that we are continuously left to beg men and even societal stereotypes that keep dragging us into the trashes or in the trenches. So women, whenever they are trying to have a life, say if it's a woman leader or a female leader, most of them are pinpointed, including the media that plays a major role also on these digital platforms. So a woman is placed in a position that she cannot make mistakes that are human. A woman is constantly quoted and said, you're in STEM, you're an engineer, you're a doctor, when do you have time for your family? All these societal constructions, as if a man shouldn't also have time for his family. Or you're a woman, you're over 30, just because they know your age. You're not married, you have 10 children and you don't have a boy. You know, all those different quotations come around, and those things really push women down. I've seen a number of women. I recently spoke about cyber harassment on a platform, and the spaces are high. You know, women face twice as much cyber harassment on these digital platforms than the men, and even the reporting platforms are not as easy. to access, because women do not know how to navigate them. They do not know, like how Eunice said, it's important to have these safeguarding platforms. Do women know how to keep themselves safe on these online platforms, to be able to block or to report? But again, when you report, who is in charge of the power? Who is going to respond to your aspect? Because if you report someone who is a friend to a perpetrator, then I'm sure they'll be so slow to handle that. And of course, the last aspect is on the revenge pornography that happens.
It's even not revenge porn.
It's not even revenge porn.
Sharing intimacy
Exactly.
without consent.
Without consent. I mean, we are adults that are consenting, and we had that intimate aspect before, but then all of a sudden you're using your aspect of power or your privilege in the online digital on the digital platform to just try and frustrate a woman's life. You're trying to drag them. I've seen my friend before, even I think Esther Birungi recently, just because someone's account was hacked, the first suspects or the first victims were women. A woman being trashed and said that she was having an affair with this honorable. Why must it be always the women? So that takes me to your aspect of the activism. How can we, as the women's movement, be able to leverage these platforms for our own agenda, to our advantage? In as much as we have spoken about the need for education, the need to sensitize on this use, for us, for me who does more activism in the rural areas through FemTalk West Nile, how can those young women and the older women understand these digital platforms? Yes, organizations come on ground and console them and say, after all, you know how to use your phone. But that's not it. Do you know how to use your phone to also make money? And and break the economic gap that is in place, and can you use the platform to also leverage on it and have a life of your own, like you would physically? So many a times, even the fellow women themselves do not, they give up too fast. Women need to stick to their point. When a woman speaks, they speak authoritatively, and somehow some of them shy away and stop at that without driving the point home. I wish women that are listening or will be able to get to hear this can know that there is power in your voice, even if it shakes. So even if you're texting something and it doesn't make sense to you, someone else will see the sense in the message you're passing. I do write blogs. I don't think a minister has read my blogs, but I write blogs critiquing that.
You'd be surprised.
Exactly.
You'd be surprised that
Sure.
they actually read them.
And maybe they're not doing anything about
Yeah.
it because they feel like, oh no, we can't do that. But I write blogs that push for gender responsive governance, the policies that are in place. I pick on a policy, I write about it, I critique it, and even give recommendations and say this would be the bomb for it. This would be the dynamite that would make Ugandan women have a safer place. And I want to refer you to the ILO C190 that we recently had, the hashtag aspect. So many organizations did it, and I must applaud Akina Mama Wa Afrika and FIDA Uganda. They really pushed for it, and I believe they are still working on it behind closed doors. But then for us that are watching, that might not be able to enter that boardroom and speak, how can we participate collectively? Because it's the same agenda, and the policies or these international conventions are going to work for our good. So when a hashtag dies out, let's bring it up again and keep speaking about it. Can we ratify ILO C190 on sexual harassment in the workplace in Uganda? Can we ratify the law on domestic workers, because we have so many of them in Uganda? Unfortunately, the aspect of power, like Eunice said, the people that are there feel like, I am actually in power, I know this is wrong, but I'm still the one torturing this domestic worker in my home. So if this law is ratified, I'm going to be a victim. Yes. So it's like the aspect of when the anti-prostitution bill was being raised in Parliament, and then the sex workers said, we're going to start mentioning our clients, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. So there's a way when someone is in a point of privilege, they feel like oppression is something that is a threat to them. So they continuously want to guard their privilege, which is something that is a very thin line between men and women in these aspects. They are so patriarchal in nature, and they want to guard their privilege that they very well know is actually oppressive to the women. And we have to really utilize these digital platforms to speak up, to point out and tag that this person is the ED of this and that, and you sexually harassed my sister. Let's not die out, and let all the other movements come up and speak, because I've seen a lot of such things coming up and they're successful. They actually bring fruit. But the ones that die out, it's possibly because you didn't even tag the person, or you are speaking and you didn't tag other organizations. People see, like Eunice said, I would be surprised that someone read my article.
And they
So
just don't find the need to start working.
Exactly. But what if whatever you post is actually seen by a very crucial body or someone like us on this panel, and we push it forth so that we get the success that we deserve out of it. So the aspect is intentionality and keeping it sustainable enough that even when we give up, or of course, she'll have the times where we're so tired of using the hashtag of anti-sexual harassment in Uganda, like Mwesiga Samantha, which is a public case. You know, when you try and feel like we're giving up, bring it up again and say, hey, president, hey, minister, or MP, can you bring this back in house? What are you doing as a leader? What is your pulse of leadership that we trusted you with? So for me, I believe it's about intentionality and actually keeping up with our voice despite it shaking, or despite the English that we use to type, because some of us do not even, or even when you type it in a comment section because you don't know how to use Twitter and you feel like it should have been a tweet. You're still doing the right thing. Your message has been passed, and we can together rise up and break these barriers. Yeah.
And you speak of something that is critical in using digital platforms on language and language moderation. I've found that there've been a lot of, especially women parliamentarians, who decide not to engage in social platforms simply because, one, they either, the experiences have been, covered in violence. People go off the agenda and then attack the person. But then also in language, because sometimes when we use our dialect, there's no way to flag that if you're using the social media platforms. And so there's a critical conversation that needs to happen on language moderation when it comes to these spaces. But again, the question is, are the people in the Silicon Valley willing to actually, add other languages to these platforms, to the working Unicodes of these platforms? But critical for me, and I think it's what Patience talked about, was on, using voice and the power of a collective. And I think this conversation is one I want us to have this year on how do we better collaborate as women, but also as a collective have a compact on, addressing women's issues, because this is something that could be in a compact that speaks to, as a women of Uganda, this is who we are. These are the asks, the critical asks that we have. So how do we build that for us as a movement, but also to continue the work that we keep having without, having to tire or to readjust or to reempt again what we've been doing on, but to have a compact that speaks to this is who we are. So if we give it to policy makers, to government, to anyone that cares to hear, how do we get to that place?
Thank you, Tricia, and thank you so much, Patience. It's quite a delight, actually, to listen to you speak. I just wanted to say, just like we've just said, what happens offline also happens online. So now I want to flip it and say that what happens online
Also happens
needs to happen offline. So we need to be able to complement the hashtags with what happens offline. So yes, you can have a campaign online, but then how do you also connect with the offline? How do you connect with the policymakers? How do you connect with those that are not online? How do you ensure that you're in those rooms where decisions are being made, because they're not being made online? The
so
online
you don't
is
talk to
more
yourself alone online.
Yes.
True.
So you don't want to create echo chambers. So online is very important in raising awareness, in raising consciousness, in refining and clarifying the issue that you're trying to discuss. It's critical and it's important. It has its advantages. You're able to reach more people. You're able to connect globally. You're able to get, I have seen sometimes when we have Twitter spaces or webinars, you get an activist, say from Mexico, join in and they can share their perspective, etc. So it's important. But then it's important that we are able to then collect that information into messages that we can then pass on to policymakers, to those who are making the decisions, those who are not online, and so be able to connect the movements in that sense. So the organizing needs to happen offline and influence online, and the online also needs to happen and influence the offline, so that we do we come together. So you will see that a lot of older feminists may not necessarily be online. So, for example, you will not find Dr. Sylvia Tamale, who we respect, online, coming up with all these tweets, etc. But then offline, she's very phenomenal and impacting and making these contributions. So for me, even just listening to her make a submission last week before the Legal and Parliamentary Committee, I was like, this is so powerful. And I like what happened. She was recorded and then it was shared online. Yeah. So there has to be that connection. And also on a positive note, to really appreciate technology. We are here having this conversation that is going to be shared widely and disseminated. That previously, where you can only have a workshop of 20 people to discuss these issues, we can now sit here, the three of us, have this conversation, and then this conversation is actually expanded beyond us in this room, the three of us. So there are pros and cons of each of the methodologies that are being used, and to also respect expertise. We talked about, for example, Minecraft. Sometimes my children ask me to get an account and and play those games, and I'm thinking, why would I be playing games with people I do not know? But the joy they find in that space, I'm like, okay, I need to respect generations. So I would say that it's to be able to really think through about the differences.
And that's critical for us, because going forward, it's going to be very hard to have separate advocacy fronts. It's going to be a Mario. We came online. I think it reminds me of the women's protest in 2019, where we had a lot of urgency happen online and then become a protest offline, and it was quite impactful for me. But going forward, and I think now that is where our urgent work is in building bold, decisions. When we speak about gender injustice online and the legal framework of Uganda, there's a disparity there, because even the laws that we have do not speak to the urgent questions women are saying need to be addressed. They do not speak to cyberbullying in a very critical way, other than to the persons of the president or any other important person. So how do we push for law reform and policy change in making sure that the laws that are being passed do speak to women and girl issues, and also do protect people and their experiences online?
Okay. Thank you so much, Tricia and Eunice, for your elaborate submission. Well, I must say that today, the internet, like we have all said, is not something that everyone is so used to, except maybe the persons that have studied for it, or those that have practiced it over time, and those that have actually put interest towards it. So in that, so many people need to be aware that there's a lot of illegal identity, or there's this quote that people say, the internet is a dog, discuss. You can't tell who you're talking to about possibly private things, or someone who is going to come and excite you because they have read your profile and know the line of track of work you're doing, and then they come and inbox you with that kind of opportunity, and you're rushing to follow up on it, only to find out your data is being stolen, your account is being hacked. So we do not even know how to navigate those aspects. But then on the aspect of legislation, I must say, even the legislators themselves, the people that are supposed to make these laws and pass them, might not actually understand the workings of these laws. Have they sat down and possibly understood the pros and cons of the internet and chosen a side to say, yes, we want to leverage on the pros, and yes, we want to fight the cons in order to make it at a more bigger and better advantage for the citizens of Uganda? So there's the aspect of, like you said, it's usually still the aspect of power. the one that is more privileged only speaks up when their favorite or personal privilege is also being affected.
True.
But if it's some other person or a citizen, they feel like, they will deal with it. But have you ever known that before even you got into that power, you are still a normal human being? Or possibly after that power, you're going to get back on ground and still be like the other citizens. It's only that they are on a side of bread that has butter or margarine or what, and for us we are on the other side that doesn't have that. So we are all typical culprits or people who might become victim of the misuse of these digital platforms. So we need to be very woke at it. So even as they're making these legislations recently with the Computer Misuse Act that was amended, still the kind of information in the act is not as open as it should be for a major or a normal citizen out there, a layman, to understand these laws. So if a layman can't understand these laws, I still spoke at a platform and said even the people that are making these legislations possibly have not understood what is in these acts that they are passing. They have not understood how practicable it will be to safeguard the citizens of Uganda. So it speaks to the aspect of decentralization. It's important that these legislators find time or even put it, because it's our right to understand these laws. You cannot, we already had the social contract theory. We gave them power to lead us and hold these resources on our behalf. So they can't come with laws that do not work or we do not understand, even up to the rural areas. Does that one last man in the rural community that possibly didn't even go to school know that there's an act that actually governs the internet? Or there's an act that will protect him if he's trying to pay tax? Because recently we went into I think revenue digitalization. The government wants to incorporate that in communities. So do they understand? Does that woman in the market know that if she pays her tax, maybe the system will fail and they will say, you've not paid, pay it again? First she'll panic and she'll pay it again, and her money will go just like that. But you who is eating taxpayers' money, or who is not doing your role as a leader, is just seated at your home, relaxed and watching the news, because possibly even the news won't capture that. After all, most times the headlines capture those that have status in community and only run to you when your problem will give them more viewers. It's not like they care about us. They don't. So it's important that even as they're legislating, it doesn't hurt to get a team of experts, women in STEM. There are very many. We need to celebrate them and highlight their profiles more often. They can be brought to Parliament and actually explain to the legislators the effect and the impact of these laws. And in turn, these legislators and the media personalities and those that have understood, organizations, non-state actors and all that, should be able to pass on this information in various forms, you know, in the language that someone will understand, to the women who are persons with disability. Can they, you know, integrate that a woman who can't see can be able to listen to what this is all about? Because they are, some of them are actually humiliated online and used as memes without consent. Your photo is there, or your child's photograph is put somewhere, and 10 years down the road, this child's reputation is no more, just because a certain law is not incorporated very well into the system. And finally, of course, the access to justice. I recently, I think FIDA Uganda conducted an online research for how people have used digital platforms, and I also participated by filling it in. The questions were very interesting. And one of them was, how often do you report a case of digital violation? And most of, I think most of the responses, because I sat with my friends, the girls, and I asked them, guys, please respond to these questions. And most of them were like, me, I never report, because who am I going to report to, and what are they going to do? So they keep quiet. And most of them, and that's just like 5 out of 7 girls. So assuming all the other citizens are asked the same questions. I'm sure so many women are suffering out there. They're crippling, even if there is a law that we say is actually in place. But how is this law being implemented? Is it being actualized to the people, or is it just a form of political trying to put a face off there and say, yeah, we're actually doing our work, you know? So it's very absurd, and it's a reality, and it gets back to us, the people, when it's time for putting to accountability these particular leaders or legislators that are in place. Yes, you know, they should be able to account to us and tell us, yes, there's this law that was passed and this is how we are able to get it. So even the justice system needs to be more accommodative of young women and more experienced women, you know, to ensure that they get justice, to ensure that if someone is violated, can you be able to track them? We should be able to invest both online and offline. And these are the things that should be majorized, should be made as a major talk in us in our country, as opposed to majoring in minors, you know. So it's very sad that we have leaders that will possibly go and talk about things that are not very relevant to the livelihood of Ugandans, and yet we have such changes, and they claim that we are moving into a fourth industrial revolution or that we are already in it, and we hope to have all these digitalized platforms. But even them that are making these legislations, do they really understand these laws? Because if the laws do not work, then they should be able to adjust and flexibly include very many people, especially the women that are more vulnerable in this aspect. Yes.
And when you spoke on governance and using platforms, I thought of, you know, the fact that we are in a dispensation where we want to do e-governance. But the critical question is on data, and whether our governments have really appreciated, you know, the future of data and data being the new gold, and how to leverage that. And I say that because there was a time a lot of government websites had been hacked in. It was a protest by Anonymous, you know, and Anonymous did a very good, you know, illustration of what it means to have a cyber insecurity or government systems that are not critically protected. How do we, you know, marry the disconnect between individual data that government holds and its protection, but then also the appreciation of government in having their country's data and in protecting it? How do we have that conversation happen where data is really leveraged to develop a country like Uganda?
Thank you. It was interesting to listen to Patience talk about how she filled in this survey.
Yes.
And so that's one way that government can actually, in a cheap way, be able to harvest data that then it can use for planning. Because a lot of the times government has said it doesn't have resources to collect this information and be able to use it for planning. Because when you think about the Uganda Bureau of Standards, it spends a lot of money really doing all these mega surveys. But then now, how can that be cheaper with technology? One of the things that the first National Development Plan had said, or maybe the second, had said that it would use technology to leapfrog our development. And that's because as an underdeveloped country, we can't go through the same process that developed countries went through to develop. So how can we leverage on technology to achieve the same or get closer to development, our own defined development?
That makes sense to us.
Yeah, that makes sense to us, because also we may be trying to achieve certain things. So how can we use technology to leapfrog improving our livelihood? Maybe I don't want to use the word development because it has also been misused. So certain countries are considered developed, and then we are considered underdeveloped.
And still developed.
Or developing. So maybe to move away from those terminologies that may not make sense to us anymore, to say how can we use technology to improve the status of our people. And so even thinking about having data that informs and shapes our decisions. Because when you have data, decisions are made quite easily. The data speaks for itself. When you think about, for example, the police crime report, it has data that speaks to what the actual problem is that we are facing in terms of sexual crimes. And so even when we are speaking about coming up with a new or coming up with the Anti-Homosexuality Act, it has not been informed by data. Where is that data? We are hearing all this information of recruitment, those who are
Where's the data?
recruiting. Where is the data? And yet, as a country, we have consistently come up with a police crime report.
Yes.
How come that data has not been included in that police crime report? So we should also be asking our policymakers. So when you speak about data, that's when I say data is important. Yes, we do have sex crimes in this country. We must address the issue of sexual crimes.
Yes.
Where is the data? And based on that data, then we can have all this animation that we are seeing, the uproar. Because when you think about in 2020 and 2021, the increase in numbers of teenage pregnancy, we didn't need to have any data. It was in our faces.
Yes.
Girls could not return to school because they had been violated by their fathers, their grandfathers, their brothers. The data was right there in front of us, in our faces. There were anecdotal documentation of all of what's happening. And so data is really such an important issue to think about. But then also just really thinking about in a positive way, while it's easy for us to say, talk about access and think that we've moved beyond access. We haven't. There's a time when the government decided to buy laptops or iPads for members of parliament so that they could have access to Google and be able to be informed and make more informed debates in parliament. So as Patience was speaking, as like, we should interrogate whether the iPads have improved in the quality of debate in parliament. Do we see them use research and speak from that knowledge base that we have as an expectation of our honorables, members of parliament? But at that time, the conversation was, okay, we are making iPads available to members of parliament. Shouldn't we be making this same product available to our learners? Like other countries that have been able to do that, Kenya Rwanda, they made this available to learners. And when you even think about closing the rural-urban divide, this would be something that is really important. We saw that during COVID, our learners who live in rural areas were not able to continue with education. So there's that issue of access that we really need to continuously speak about. There's an issue of closing the gaps that we have between rural and urban areas. Because when I think about the fact that my 7-year-old can develop a PowerPoint, and then you find that an S6 an S6 leaver from a rural area has never really used a laptop. What does that mean for the development of this country? So we should be able to think about how we are closing the gap. And technology is really able to support this government to make the pathways that it needs to make. When you think about countries that are looking for workers that can do back-end work like India does, that will create more employment. So you're even closing the employment gap. As you know, in Uganda, we have the issue of we have underemployment, unemployable. But by being able to create skills for those who we believe are unemployable and they can do back-end work, because it's not rocket science. These are skills that people can quickly acquire and be able to provide this service. And then you're closing the employment gap. So this year, one of the things that I personally have been thinking about, because when you become middle age, you realize that maybe you have 15 years to retire. And so you're thinking, what other contribution can I make? And so for me, I was thinking about how technology can actually be leveraged or harnessed to close so many gaps. When we think about ourselves here, in a day, you're able to read 10 articles. Just by your Google feed. and you expand your mind.
Yes.
But how many people have access, like like the market woman you've spoken about, should want to know data. Where are the markets? What should I be producing for the market that is going to make sense? If she's able to access that information, market information, on her phone, even if it's not a smartphone, she's able to access that information and say someone is looking for tomatoes in Kalere, then she's able to supply. When you think about women who produce these commodities, knowing that in 3 months people will need pineapples, then you produce them and be able to make them available. So market information, because also the reason why many women do not have resources is the market equation. So how do we be able to connect the market with the producers? Through technology. You think about how young women have taken advantage of online spaces. To, you don't have to go to town anymore to shop. You just flip through your different Telegram, Instagram, and find a shop, buy, it's delivered by safe
Even
border.
thrift is now online.
Yeah. So think about it. The other day, my son told me that he was so excited to see Chikubo online. So he laughed. He was like, you mean Chikubo is online? The whole, So thinking about all these advantages that we can harness from technology, but again, like you said, would need that data.
We do need
And
that
so we
data.
need our leaders to lead. I think what's important is that we need our leaders to lead, and to lead differently, and to lead with the times that we are in.
I hear you, and when you said we need our leaders to lead, as perhaps also the leaders need that critical knowledge on what data really is and how they can have, data governance help them lead better. That's a conversation now we need to have with leaders themselves. But then also when you spoke on iPads, it reminded me of the fact that there's been a lot of laws that have passed over the time between the period where our legislators have had, access to digital platforms and to knowledge bases, that we've had a lot of debate happen that is not really, really critically informed by information online. And then a person will stand and do have a debate on their emotion and passion. And the critical questions of why, when, what, how keep missing. And so when you said that, I remembered how the president told them pause on a bill like the anti-homosexuality bill, pause. We need to find the data. We need to find the research. What do the doctors say? Is it nature? Is it nurture? He really brought us back to the critical need for research and data and debate, and that is what came to my mind.
Which he did in 2013.
Which he did in 2013.
Which he did in 2013.
Yes.
And he actually got a report from scientists.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
I was telling someone this, we've had this conversation before. It feels like it's deja vu. And that is good that we even have, the internet doesn't forget. So we even have clips of it.
Yeah.
So quite interesting to have this conversation a few years later on the same topic with the same recommendations, only to see that we actually have the answers that we are looking for. But as we close this conversation, now that we are, we acknowledge, we may not be really, at a place where we appreciate concretely, because we have a lot of people cut from this conversation. And I keep having this conversation around digital rights, digital platforms, cyber policy, cyber security. And I know it almost sounds like a conversation of privilege, because there are people who have seen book and paper for a while, or even no book and paper for a while. But as we push ourselves into the digital revolution and advance, our work around gender equality, how do we, push for justice and equity in this, ecosystem that we live in, especially for last mile girls, last mile women, to continue to advocate for them in spaces where we have a seat at the table. I'll go with you and Eunice can wind it up.
Okay, well, we've had a very interesting conversation. I wish we would keep talking and on, but there's a lot of action to do, really. I've learned so much from that space, and I think it's our role and everyone who is on these digital platforms to shape the narrative. It's you to use your voice or that particular platform. There are so many platforms. It's more than just the internet. It goes into the emails, it goes into all these Google websites. What articles are you writing? What history of women are you putting to book? Is it only the one that is bad, is it only that other side or something? Because I remember recently someone posted a thread of women in history who are serial killers. Like,
how is it beneficial?
Exactly,
to
how
the
is it
conversation of
beneficial? And you
advancing
clearly
women?
would see they're bringing it out just because they want to show that women are bad people or something. But it's a matter of humanity, and as citizens, we have now clearly discussed on this particular forum that it's important to leverage these digital platforms, and the government should not shy away from it. They should be even putting more effort to to these online platforms, because the information still trickles down to the physical platforms. So for me, I just want to see a community where women are able to step out of those toxic relations more easily without being stopped by anyone. A woman should be able to say their no, and that's it. A woman should be able to come and block someone, and that's it. Or if a woman is hacked, can they be safe enough? Can they access justice and be able to speak up, as opposed to having all these laws just written, So for me, the topic today is on a call for us to speak up, a call to action, more action, and a call for enhancing how we are approaching these particular platforms. Like Eunice ably said, we should be able to trickle down that information, vice versa, online to physical and physical to online. There's so much that we have to do, and trust me, it's not yet done on the physical aspect. Women are still being harassed and abused more than ever, because even the people that are doing it are those in power or more privileged, so they can't be caught or arrested easily. But online is even worse, because people are undercover. There is a mask to their face, and you can't know who exactly is that person or which location they are harassing you from. So we need to be alert, we need to be woke, and utilize it for more advantageous aspects, but as well also really decentralize and ensure this information trickles down to the very last person in our citizenry, who may not be able to access these platforms, but should be able to understand what it's all about, to the advantage. Yes, thank you so much.
As I went down.
I would say for me, we've covered a lot, but maybe to touch on education. I truly believe education is an equalizer. And so maybe we can use technology to leverage how we can enhance women and girls being able to close that education gap. For me is what's important. Even when I think about re-entry of teenage mothers into school, is that the best option? Could they instead have been online as they try to deal with all the issues around pregnancy? Because when I think about a 13 pregnant young girl and still going to school and having to navigate school when she's pregnant, the pain, or if there's any, I don't know. It's really just to think and ask ourselves, how can we think about the box? And the fact that we still have very, very many numbers of girls dropping out of school for different reasons, really. And so how can we leverage technology to be able to close that education gap for girls? So for me, that's one. But really, when I also think about political education, beyond the traditional education, how can we use technology to really educate ourselves? Because part of the problem is that our curriculum has remained archaic. So how can we begin to get the knowledge that that really suits our conditions as Africans? And that again is technology, being able to work it out. So this year's theme on of the Commission on the Status of Women really was apt and responsive to women. When I think about the fact that we are here speaking because we accessed education, and the status could be different if we had not accessed education. We would not be able to speak in the Queen's language as we are,
and understand each other,
but even to be able to leave our homes and come to a public space because we accessed education. So just at the bare minimum for me, if there was anything I would really urge us to think more deeply about is how education can be used as a lever to deliver on gender equality.
Thank you for joining me in this conversation. I hope you come back on the next one next week. But today I wanted to celebrate a lady called Nanono Rebecca, who is a Uganda digital innovator and a feminist. But most importantly, the work she has done in creating a chatbot that shares information on SRHR. That's one way of creating responsive digital platforms and tools to leverage, safety for women and girls in this digital age. And so we continue to champion people like Nanono because they speak to what we are addressing today, and they put it into the practical bit, what we can tangibly see and use. From us here, we want to thank you for joining us. Bye.